But really, I think like the sculpture department is just getting more reading. So I don't know.
It's interesting. I know Sarah Doherty pretty well. Who's the head now. I'm going to ask her what she's assigning. Good to hear. Question occurred to me. Can you be taught? This is going to sound dumb. Can you be taught to have your own style? What can be taught about? Because I imagine, see, here's me. I'm the naive non-artist thinking here about this and posing you questions. I'm thinking like the lauded artists, the respected artists, something like David Hockney, maybe if we're going to call these geniuses, their work of genius, what they end up doing is they end up developing a very distinctive style, right? Now, is that something that can be taught, or what can be taught about it? Just thought I'd throw that question out there. I don't know, Abby, what do you think?
So I've thought about this a lot. I think art style for me is something, I think it's a little less directly related to art education, maybe. Art style, the way I think about it, is similar to like sort of writing. Like the way that you get better at writing is by reading. So I think that art style, like it's like inevitably as an artist in like contemporary culture, you're going to be influenced like throughout your life by like the art that you see. It depends on like what you see, what like affects you like emotionally, or like what you like are inspired by, sort of like what Kant's talking about. Like artists are like inspired by like people who've come before them.
Yes.
Or like what they like see as sort of examples, and then over time you sort of synthesize these together into something that's more your own. And like you can look at someone else's art and like try to identify like the features of their style that like you like appreciate, or like that you would maybe want to like try out, or like if I did something like that, then that would be interesting, or that would be fun. But it's less of a conscious thing and more of something that's like sort of a growth. I don't know if it's something that can really be consciously taught.
Yeah. Prodded, encouraged, certainly not taught.
I think that there's an argument against that as well, though. I mean, especially if you're like, and again, it's going to be like interpretation. Like someone might look at this, someone's personal style and be like, oh, that's so derivative of this or that. It's not a personal style. But then again, it is. Like, I mean, that's what a personal style is. It's like measured appropriation to an extent.
Okay. Thank you. Shar.
I was going to say that back in like the Renaissance and stuff, when art was treated as more of a product than just something you do to express yourself, when art, you were commissioned by a church to paint a certain thing.
Yeah.
You had to paint it. There was like a standard, especially I'm going to talk about like Renaissance in like Europe.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the time there was a very specific style that was taught because that's what people wanted. That's what people want. Like,
Yes, I agree with you. Yes.
Oh yeah. So they were taught a very specific style, like, like this is how you paint a person's face. This is how you did. Like you see a lot of these sketches from when they were students. They are very, 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 very similar because the teachers taught more of this is how you draw it, not, oh, you can draw this. It's like, this is how you draw it.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, James.
So I think it might also be like a personal journey type thing a little bit, at least partially for me. When I grew into like my gender and femininity, I was like, I don't want to draw realism anymore. So I started drawing cartoony and pink and all of that. And it was still like the same painterly style, but I started liking art more because I started embracing my own style without like barring myself from more like cartoony stuff. So I think it's sometimes a personal journey too. Yes, you can be influenced by other people, and I truly think you should be, but also you have to look inside yourself sometimes. I don't know if that's too like hippie.
No, that's good. Thank you very much. I have to think on that. Charlie.
I was kind of thinking that it sort of depends how you're classifying style. Because if you're talking about the concepts behind the work, then it might be something more like what James said, where it's very much about your thought process as you're making it. But I have an illustration minor and I work in like comic books, and there's like a bunch of different artists and a bunch of different writers that all work on the same serialized comic books, and they have to make it try and look the same. So it's like there's definitely a way where you can teach someone the same style that someone else has. You can make things consistent between a bunch of separate artists. But then at the same time, if you look at the individual artists' more personal work, where they aren't all working on the same project, you would see more like variables in it.
We keep butting, thank you, Charlie. We keep butting up against these recurring questions that Plato asked, which are kind of a little bit subdued with Kant, but will come to the fore again with Hegel. And these questions are, what is the purpose of art? What is art for? Who are you creating for? Are you creating only for yourself? Are you creating for others? Are you creating a product? For Kant, it's not a product, right? It's hard to even say why it's created. Hegel is very specific. We'll see about that. But those are very good questions, Charlie. And you caught me out. I was presuming, right, that something in it being an artist is that you would develop a distinctive style. But, that's naive of me, of course, right? I'm a philosopher, not an artist. Maybe some of the professors talk that way. I imagine some of them would. But the reality is that many of you guys are getting this education to get a job, in which case maybe style is not as important, right? As you were indicating, Charlie, you need to be malleable, right? That was very good. Thank you very much. McShafe.
I think it's also important to note when we're thinking about this, like within the context of history, the modernist period of art, modernism and impressionism and things like that didn't start until about 40 years after Hegel died in like the 1870s. So when you're thinking about how thinkers like Kant and Hegel might have interpreted art, it was basically in the period where like everything was done in schools. Like you would physically go to a school and learn a style, but like in the Western art world, at least, where like the kind of art that they were familiar with, basically everyone in a period would make art in the same kind of style. And it was like informed by each other, but it wasn't like this is the correct way to make art. I just think the way people create art now is much more diverse, and there are much more like accepted ways to create really disparate kinds of work than there was at that period. And I think that's also important in understanding like when Hegel's talking about art and science, because it was much more structured, I think, in like the way people taught and learned how to create art.
Thank you. Joey.
If the question is still about like, can you teach a style? I'm gonna have to I'm doubling down and saying because especially if you consider style in art as like an accent, like in comparison, like we all have accents. We speak a specific way because of the things that we were introduced to, or the things that are important to us. Like whether we realize it or not, we may speak like a favorite character on a TV show and not even recognize it. Or we could personally just aim to sound like a character off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for example, or something like that. Like the way that they speak, like that, you can adopt a style. You can be taught a style. I mean, like there are entire schools of like being able to replicate a specific type of style of art, as well as like, you know, I mean, for example, the Mid-Atlantic accent, completely made up, that like people went to school to learn how to speak in a Mid-Atlantic accent.
Mm.
So yeah, I do believe that you can teach style, but I think that it then again comes back to like the interpretation of like, is that really style? And like, that's a whole other conversation in my opinion.
Well, what I really meant, Joey, just to be clear, is like a distinctive style. Like, of course I can teach you the Baltimore accent, but you know, you might not get it. It's a little bit nuanced, but you know, like I was thinking like with Hockney, like when you see a David Hockney piece, you know, that's Hockney. Like there's something so distinctive about that I would submit that that's something that's not communicable. Right. And
well, then would you
asking
even
the
consider
question-
it style at the same point though? Like, because I feel like style is something that's like quantifiable and marketable, as
Okay,
opposed to like,
what would you call it? Like when you see a Hockney, you know that's a Hockney. What is that?
I don't know that I have another word for it, but style feels hollow and kind of like, I have to think about it more.
A signature.
Sure. Signature. Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Well,
like it's outside of that realm, you know.
That's how you all would put it, but us non-art people, we would use the word style. I'm just telling you. And again,
Right.
the English language has problems, no doubt, and maybe that's one of them. But and I'm using the word style very broadly too, right? There's something about certain artists that you see their work and you know it's theirs, and I don't know that that's something you can teach. I have one more question for everybody, and I think Meg kind of inspired me to ask this. This might be a troubling one. I'm just curious, what do you wish, and it's in the chat, what do you wish you learned at art school that you maybe are not? Char, that was fast.
I think I said it before, but I wish I learned more technical stuff. Like just, I want a whole, like a day where we learn how to paint foliage. I want a whole day where we learn how to paint like color, like do more color stuff. I want a whole day where they sit down and say, hey, the way you're painting this is like, here's your style, but this is like, here's how to maybe convey it a little better. Because I always struggled a lot with certain things. And when I asked teachers, literally, how do I make it so that this looks a certain way? And they're like, well, you see, you just have to they just said more like conceptual stuff. And yeah, like Meg, probably you said you feel the exact opposite. Maybe as like a painting person, like I just want to learn how to paint things. Like it was always very open-ended. It was never, here's how to do this. It was always, oh, just do this. And they would try to teach you more, like, I don't know, ideas and how to make things represent other things in a painting. Like, oh, this color blue represents the sadness. If it was a warmer blue, it would be different.
See, that's why I always like avoided illustration classes. I make comics and stuff as well. But whenever I would like go in, I'd always get critique about like perspective and like,
it's like, no, tell me if that looks like a tree or not, please. I want to know.
I
tell me how to
also
paint the
think
tree.
I agree with what's going on in the chat, that like one of the kind of greatest resources that Micah does have that they do not share with us is connections and kind of ins to the art world. And I will say, as someone who just graduated, so I did my senior year already, senior year is supposed to like involve introducing you to people in your fields and like kind of helping launch that process. For some reason, they decided that was one of the things that could go due to COVID, even though that makes no sense. Mm-hmm. So it feels like I agree with you in that I wish there were more kind of practical skills, and I guess that applies to like how to paint a tree, but that also like I was shocked at the lack of info about how to operate in the art world that was taught at art school. Because I feel like in like business school, they're not teaching you about business merely in the realm of like the hypothetical. And it felt like here it was kind of like, good luck.
Yeah. I wouldn't really know, but I know in the illustration department, maybe illustration, animation, and graphic design, those are more in demand in today's society, especially digital stuff like graphic design. My friend, he graduated from University of Maryland last year. He was a graphic designer. He got a job and he's salaried straight out of college. Like things that are more in demand, at least from my perspective, they give you more resources to here's how to get a job, here's how to interview for a job. But for a painting major, it's like it's I wish it was kind of more like back in the 80s or whatever, when they had painted backgrounds for a lot of sci-fi movies. Like paintings were a thing, like hand painted backgrounds were a thing, and I would love to do that, but now that's not really a thing. It's more digital art. But I wish they would give us a little more especially with like majors that maybe aren't as in demand. I wish they would give us more resources on here's what you can do with your degree. Here are specific places that have hired these people in the past. Because like as a painting major, like what am I just going to sit and paint landscapes and sell that for a living? Like I don't want to do that. I would want to do something else. They kind of leave you out like, oh, it's either freelance and you go to grad school and you become a teacher. For painting majors, it's like you go to grad school and become a teacher, and I don't want to become a teacher at all. And it's like I just want to know what I can do, because I want to do a lot. I just don't know. Like
Joey. Thanks, Char.
So to piggyback on what Meg was talking about, how they kind of like hide those connections and stuff. One thing I've come to realize from being a dual master's and bachelor's program enrollments is that the bachelor's programs at MICA are there to pay for the master's programs. So you guys literally are just going to school to pay for all of that. No, it's the other way around, because most of the master's students don't even pay.
Well, except
but
the online ones.
The
issue
online
is ones not.
Like all of that kind of like networking and stuff is saved up for those grad students. They didn't cut any of that for the grad students this past year. In fact, they like went to extreme ends to be able to like get the illustration grad students and the fine arts grad students like Zoom meetings with like higher ups in like New York fine arts and illustration like companies, you know, to come in and like look at their stuff online and give them critiques and stuff. So it is like a kind of really gross tool. Like you guys are literally like, we all are just there to pay for the master's programs.
Well, I would push back against that a little bit. I would just say you're talking about the ones that take place in the Meyerhoff. There are many through open studies that are not, and that I'm
talking about the Lazarus ones, actually.
Yeah, I'm talking about the online ones bankroll the rest of the college in a big way. But I'm not going to pretend I could speak to what you're talking about. I accept, everything you're saying. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, being a photo major who just graduated, we definitely did have like people who came in and talked about their like experience and working and stuff. But realistically, we only had one person who owned their own studio practice. And then we had a bunch of people from Magnum Photo, which did not sit well with most, like pretty much all of the photo department, like the people who were students. Because Magnum, like literally just one of their photographers posted images on a magazine of like nude children without their permission. And then we got them to talk to the student body of MICA. So yeah, don't beg for things that might not be so good, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
All right. So among the things lacking is networking opportunities and career. And I can tell you, since I arrived at MICA, there have been, there's been some emphasis on that, not as much as it could be, it looks like. Shar makes a plug for foliage and the like, right? I like how someone put it in the chat, like Bob Ross stuff. I forget who put that. Like,
Yeah, because Bob Ross is like, you take the paintbrush, angle it this way,
yeah,
do that, and you create it. And I'm like, please, like, I wish I was taught.
And I think that's how North made her sing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that stuff, like just little brush strokes, like it works, but they don't teach us that. They're like, you have to convey the idea of a tree. I'm not going to tell you how to draw one. You're going to have to be able to convey the idea.
It's because some of the teachers don't even know how to do that stuff. That's why. Like, they don't know how to do that stuff, and they don't know how to teach it. And a big issue that I have with some of the hiring for like full-time employees in specific departments like painting, and well, not painting so much. I've actually had a really good experience with the painting instructors, but like some of the teachers for like figure drawing and illustration, they're hired because of their experience in the field as opposed to their ability to teach. And that is the standard pretty much throughout the rest of the school. You get a teacher that's good at teaching, it's because they put in the effort to learn how to communicate with their students. It's not because, they're just naturally good at teaching. And every other teacher who's not that way says, oh, I'm just not that kind of teacher. But it's literally them not putting in the effort that they're supposed to put in order to learn how to communicate with their students. And it's just like, why are we paying so much money for this if they're not going to actually change their teaching styles to approach us at our level? And it's just, I mean, I could go off about like the money for this school for an hour at least. I mean, the president makes way too much money to say that they can't afford to hire adjunct full time, or have, it's absurd.
Yeah, maybe it's private versus public, because it's sort of like different values.
I had a teacher in freshman years, like I disagreed with her about like the purpose of art, and like I tried to explain my thing, and about conversation she just told me I don't belong at this school, if that's what my beliefs were.
Who was it?
I honestly don't remember.
They do deserve to be fired.
Well, let me just point out, Joey, we've just spent the last hour talking about what it means to teach art, and we still haven't really landed on much. I'm not going to try and defend Sammy.
I think Char's got it the best.
But,
I think Char's got it the best, because it's not like art is some kind of, I think it becomes disgusting and a really murky area of discussion and education when you don't approach art like it is something that can be taught through technique, because it is something that can be taught through technique. And that's like literally the one verifiable thing we know we can teach as far as art is concerned. And they avoid it because some of the teachers here don't know how to do those things. And they also don't know how to teach those techniques because they get their job based on their chops in the actual like selling art field, which doesn't necessarily require them to understand perspective or color theory or how to use brushes in a very specific way. And in fact, some of them are just like, throw out that brush, you'll never need it. Like, and clearly you will need that brush for a reason, because someone made that brush for a very specific reason. And when they say something like that, it makes me feel like you don't actually have an investment in this at all. Like, you are here to collect a paycheck and continue using the network of the school to sell your own artwork. That's it.
Well, I can tell you, I don't think many of my colleagues make a lot of money selling their own art. But listen, you need to pay attention to what Meg's saying in the chat, right? There's not everybody is agreeing with what Shar says about is essential to an art education, okay? So don't pretend we have unanimity here. Emerald.
Oh, I kind of almost forgot what I was going to say because I was asking Meg, what did you mean about concept art, as in like the conceptual, like making art as like a concept though? Like, like the different, like the actual thing, concept art versus like, I feel like it's the same thing with like all like teaching, which is like learning how to teach someone the skills on something, or like certain process and doing something the way they know how to do it. Like, for example, in like regular schools, it's like they teach you one way how to do this, but there's different kinds of learners. You know what I mean? And I feel like with art specifically, you also really have to do that because it also helps like nurture someone's style and their creativity and like expressing things. But like sometimes people do need to learn on how to like think, because maybe not every artist is like a thinker. That's probably not the best word. Maybe not every artist is just a doer kind of situation. And then if you're going to teach someone, you have to learn like how to teach them the way they work. You know what I mean?
That sounds very confident to
I'm
me,
I'm
Emerald.
feeling very passionate about this right this second. I don't know, like I'm this is gonna sound so kind of rude, but sometimes I would look at the work of like drawing majors and painting majors and like think to myself like, wow, this is so technically sound, but there is no point. I don't care about this at all. And like I don't think that every artist needs to talk about like trauma and the push for that, but I think that like concept art can be, and make the making of concept art can be taught through other channels. Like, I don't know, I think it can be nurtured through academia specifically. That's why I mentioned all the reading that was done in sculpture. I left GFA because GFA was like free studio. GFA was first of all, well, I left for two reasons. One, it was mixed all with like painting and drawing, which did not make any sense for me. So we were getting all these like lectures that were from like painters, and I was like, I don't care about this at all. Let me leave. But then also there was just kind of nothing on thought, which I thought would be like kind of the one unifier between all the people doing different work in GFA. Like I really thought like if any place was the place to be like reading some theory and stuff, it would be GFA, and it was not. But like I agree with whoever said that like maybe a lot of teaching conceptual art is kind of teaching how to think, because that's something that can also be taught. Like a lot of the times when I read stuff, it feels like untangling a lot of thoughts that I've had. And like, oh, now I know how to approach it and like how to think about that. I think a lot of philosophy is like that. I mentioned that in the class the other day. And I feel like that is almost like kind of learning the different channels and theory is almost to me analogous to like learning different ways to draw a tree, because it's the nurturing of like a skill set. And even if you like, we're talking about like, oh, you can't teach how to make conceptual art. Yeah, we can't teach how to make good conceptual art. Like there's a big difference. Even if you learn how to like make a tree specifically, your tree might not be compelling. Like there is that kind of fleeting, like outside of ourselves ephemera that still exists. And I don't think that it's like as different. Like you can learn how to make concept art. You can learn how to do a performance piece and like where to draw from, because there are some people who just do performance art where it's like them sitting and screaming. I did like performance art 101, and there was a lot of just like doing stuff for the sake of it, and that's cool and stuff. But like, I don't know, I bristle at, because I don't have a materials based process, I am growing but I'm growing uncomfortable with the implication that the kind of stuff that I do is not the kind of thing that can be taught. Or it goes back to the like, what do you do in art school? Just think. Now y'all are like, well, not if you draw trees. Like, okay.
Let me say a couple of things. If we accept Joey's suggestion that technique is something that can be taught, that still leaves Kant's thesis intact, which is that there's some unteachable core, which is this kind of intellectual core. I also wanted to echo what Emerald said a minute ago. I think Kant would endorse the idea that an artist is not a thinker. And I don't mean that, and that's not in a negative sense. What do I mean by that? It's this idea that the beautiful comes as a kind of inspiration, right? And the Kantian approach to art also speaks to, like, you know, what James is saying in the chat, like an art, you know, art objects are meant to convey beauty in an inspirational flash. And they're not necessarily meant to be something that is in itself kind of like a visual treatise, or, you know, something that helps you work through your problems necessarily. Of course, beauty was the goal for him, right? But there's some, at bottom for Kant, there's no intellectual training here per se. We'll see that later with Hegel. I also wanted to say, I wonder if to Joey's contention about technique, how many of your professors, as Kant would say it, your art teachers, as Kant would say it, maybe they can't, maybe because they're artists, they don't know how to teach technique. I don't know, just gonna throw it out there. You can fizzle on that one. I would also like to say, again, to James's comment about, artists talking about trauma. From my vantage point, I knew nothing about art school when I got hired 15 years ago. I was a liberal arts person. It sounded like that's all they wanted you to do. Like, can you talk about your trauma? Just bring up shit. Go.
Oh my God, yeah.
And I thought this was like, when I thought about it, I was like, is this how they try and get the artist to find inspiration?
When critiques turn into a therapy session.
And Kant, and that is not a Kantian element at all, right?
Yes.
But listen, there is, if someone made this point earlier in the class, there is a strong emphasis in contemporary art education to get you to try and spell stuff out, right? You have to write an artist statement at the end, like, these are my motivations. This is why I do what I do, right? Like, you have to be wrenched out of the Kantian universe of like inspiration, be like, no, fucking explain it now, right? Lay it out. And if trauma is involved, all the better, right? So any case, those were a couple of things I wanted to say.
Emerald brought up a really good,
well, Emerald has their hand up first, then you're up, Joey.
Yeah, we kind of skid past like half the things I was going to say.
Sorry, I got a little worked up.
It's okay. But going back what Meg was saying, like Joey spitting today, for real. God damn it. I was saying that, like, Meg, you were bringing up a point that I was bringing up, that like not everyone learns the same way. And like, I agree that we should have more theory in like critical discussion in classes, but like for a different reason, more of like not how to be fucking offensive when you make art, and like think about other people when you're making something, because I feel like a lot of people need that. But outside of that, some people like you are more of like, I need the books to learn and inspire me and make me figure out how to do something. And I agree, like I'm also that kind of way, but some people don't need that. And we should be having our programs. If you're teaching someone, teach them the way they learn, not teach them the way you think, because we are not the same people and not everyone works the same way. And also the other thing that I said before was that you need to know what the rules are in order to break them. You can't like just go and like make a conceptual tree or make a compelling tree, like was said before, without knowing how the hell to draw a tree or what a tree looks like. You know what I mean? Like, we know what it looks like, but translating that into artwork is like something you need to know. You know what I mean? And like what y'all were saying about the trauma thing, like I haven't exactly experienced that. I have a lot of meaning in my artwork, and I feel like when you actually put meaning in your art, when you get critiques, people just fucking miss it, and they'll just go on like the like regular ass like, oh, this has to like this is like this. But so many other Black like artists at this school like draw something or make something that just has a Black stuff, and it's like, oh, this is about the Black body and racism, and like I feel like you really compelled that. Well, like, no, it's just Black. Like, damn, there's other points here that are very obvious, but you're missing it because you want to make it some sort of trauma piece. Like, happiness can be just as compelling. Something you saw can be just as compelling. Exactly. A song, like inspiration doesn't really come from trauma. And I think we were talking about that, like what causes beauty. Like, not everyone's beauty for their artwork comes from trauma. There are other things that are beautiful in art or just in the world besides, well, other things that are worth talking about besides trauma. There are other places of people making stuff.
So like trauma porn is basically it's what's going on.
Yes, but
And
that's
like we can bring it
yes.
back to how that has to do with the white institution, because like I really feel like that's the base, but like let me not even start.
Well, here's a naive question, Emerald. I mean, aren't all of you, regardless of your skin color, supposed to relate trauma? No?
Wait, can
I
you
don't
repeat the
think
first
so.
part? I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
I was saying, like, aren't all of you art students, regardless of your skin color, supposed to relate trauma?
Do you mean like are all of us supposed to relate trauma even if we make artwork?
Yeah, like you were
No.
suggesting it is maybe an emphasis that African American students should relate trauma, but I thought all of you were.
Well, I think that's
No, but
racially
No.
based.
Well, hang on. Let me see what Emerald had to say, because I was directing that at Emerald.
I mean like art isn't about trauma. Sometimes art
Well,
is.
I understand. No, we're disputing that in class, of course. Sorry, right now.
Oh, you just mean like in the concept of like when trauma is being made, like art stuff.
I mean, ever since I've been at Micah, like you guys have
Yeah,
been,
but like you don't get that as often. Like they'll pinpoint what trauma you're supposed to have. Like if a female is making artwork, they'll be like, this is about sexism and sexual assault. Like, no, it's just a flower.
I
It
see.
is not a pussy. Relax. Or
So
like if it's someone's black and it's like about something that's like, oh, this is about black pain. I'm like, no, that's just like, I don't know, something that's brown on the brush stroke or whatever.
Yeah.
Like this, it's like they pinpoint what trauma we're talking about. Like not everyone has the same trauma. Not everyone necessarily has like deep trauma that needs to be written about. But like, you know, they expect you to write a specific kind of trauma when they want you to make trauma. That's the other
Thank you. I'm really glad you specified Emerald. I appreciate that. James.
So I feel like with race in these discussions, it can be racially motivated, at least in my experience. Like I'm white, first of all, but what I've seen is that I've seen a lot of like, oh, is this about is this about your race? Is this about your race? With a lot of like people of color, students of color. But like this is just in my high school, but I don't know if it's different in college. I could be completely wrong, but I just saw that sometimes, and I feel like it just can be really prevalent sometimes. Yeah, if I spoke out of turn, please let me know.
Okay, Charlie.
I was just gonna say that I'm a fibers major. I make like stop motion sets as well as like comic stuff. So all of my work is very literal. Like when I make a little sculpture of a chair, that is all that it is. And then whatever story is told through the writing of a comic or the like plot of a stop motion animation, that holds the symbolism. But the physical art that I'm making just doesn't. But I've had like, I mean, pretty much every single professor who has, when I bring up the concept of the thing that I'm excited to work on, they tell me to choose something else that has meaning to me. But like, that's not what I want. And it's like, it's a whole thing about, even if it's not something related to trauma, there's this idea that all art has to have some sort of deeper meaning for someone else to find.
Thank you, Charlie. Joey.
I tend to follow off of what other people say a lot, and I apologize if that kind of seems lazy, but what Charlie was just saying kind of really hit me at home, because I think I said kind of a similar sentiment in the chat, but it's like they want to lead us on, like they want us to express ourselves and our story or our trauma or our happiness, whatever it is, but they want to lead us to expressing it in a way that they're comfortable with, or that is more universally understood. And to an extent, I understand that art in itself is a form of communication. And if you can't communicate, then, you know, there's an argument that it doesn't have validity or something. I don't necessarily believe that, but I could see where some professors are coming from when they would, you know, make that kind of critique. But the point I'm trying to say is that like it's like they, like, God forbid you make something that makes you happy. If it doesn't, you know, fit their idea of what you should be making, like your oeuvre, and what you've done before, like it's like from their perspective, you're not trying, or you've just thrown something together at the last minute, you know?
Let me just say one thing to what you were saying a second ago, Joey, and then I'll hand it off to Shar here. I think what I put in the chat, I think what your instructors are trying to do is, in part, they want you to be self-conscious of your motivations, or fully conscious of your motivations. And you can be critical of that if you want, but I think that's part of their goal. And then, of course, to understand, and maybe the part of a public crit is to understand the impact. Like, are you really getting across to your audience what you're trying to say?
And I don't think that I kind of like expressed that correctly enough. I get that. Like, I get when a teacher is trying to tell you like, hey, you're not expressing well enough, or like, you know, far enough, like what you're trying to say, or like you're not thinking about it. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you when you present something and you tell them what it's about, and they're like, not like happy with the content. Like it's not enough for them, you know. It's not deep enough, or it's not painful enough, or it's not, you know.
No, that's not ideal, and it's really interesting to hear you guys say that. I do find that problematic as well. I agree.
I do too. It's just it fetishizes trauma,
but see,
as something that is supposed to be put on display for everyone else to gawk at. And I don't like that.
I've been sitting here on the sidelines for 15 years watching what you guys do, and I don't think it's super that you have been urged to display your trauma. You know, I don't understand that. I mean, this is a great conversation. I'm happy to hear all this. I think it's very interesting. Shar.
Yeah, and there are a lot of artists who do enjoy or find like some sort of catharsis in making pieces that are very deep and can convey their trauma.
Absolutely.
But a lot of the time, like for me specifically, back in freshman year when I was all dramatic and being annoying, I made a lot of pieces based on some stuff that had happened to me with like a breakup and whatever. And I made a bunch of pieces from it, and it was nice. But moving forward, like after that, I kind of just started making things just because. Like I would make something, like right now I'm doing these characters that are giant cicadas. And they're like humanoid cicada creatures. I'm probably gonna do my thesis on, and just like really uncanny stuff that I listen to when I'm doing art. Like I listen to a lot of spooky stories and stuff when I'm making art, and a lot of like Lovecraftian stuff. And like sometimes I just want to make art that is really weird and uncanny, and I want people to look at it and be like, oh my God, what is it? Like I'm prepared for my senior thesis because I'm going to be a senior this year. I'm prepared for them to grill me like, what does this mean? What is the deeper meaning behind your obsession with the uncanny? I'm like, I just like it. Like I feel like I'm gonna get fucking slammed because for me personally, I don't have a deep meaning I can write an entire dissertation on. Like it's just I just like making things because they look weird, and I feel like hopefully the teachers that I have will be okay with that. But like right now I don't want there to be a deeper meaning. I don't want people to be able to examine it in the future and write a whole like 10-page essay on it because of how deep this meaning is. It's like, I don't know. I just want to draw like big cicada people and neon pink deserts just because, like, and create little stories and narratives. I think a lot of the times when you're in a class and you just paint something just because, like going back to when teachers kind of force you to reveal trauma, like if you're painting something that you like to paint just because, they're like, well, I don't really get anything from this. Please, like I want you to add something that would mean something to you. And you're like, well, what if I add this? Let me explain what this means to me. And all of a sudden the teachers sometimes make you put things in the art that we really don't feel connected to. Like I start putting more metaphorical stuff in the art because the teachers keep pressing me on it. And I'm like, it doesn't, I don't like this piece anymore because it's not just like a crazy little cicada piece. It's all of a sudden it's a piece about the, like, I don't know, how certain people are treated in society. I'm like, I just want to make stuff just to make stuff. I don't want to have a meaning behind it, like all that.
Good. So I'm saving the chat because I think this is such an interesting discussion we're having here. I see some hands. I'm going to call them, but we do need to wind it down soon. I see a fault line here. I really see a fault line. I see a fault line between, those of you who emphasize or want to learn more about technique in school, and then McShafe, who talks about would like to have had more training in concept or whatever that would look like. On a selfish note, since I'm more in the realm of concept at Micah, I definitely don't teach technique. Don't ever come to me for technique. I have a question for you. What kind of like courses, academic courses, would you have liked to see offered? I'm just being selfish. Put it in the chat and I'll see what Meg has to say.
Yeah. I mean, I hear all that about like not wanting to make personal work, but I think first of all, it's dangerous to kind of act like personal and trauma are always connected. And then also I just think back to my own experiences, and in freshman and sophomore year, I really, really bristled at the idea of making personal work. It felt hokey. It felt like an out. But so I was just doing all of this like pop art. I was just like making shrines to Hannah Montana. But then I realized it's.
Wait, shrines to Hannah Montana? Is that
yeah.
That? Okay.
Yeah. I feel like then I realized that like it kind of still is imbued in my personal experience and how I see the world. And like one cannot deny being like a product of one's influences and stuff such as that. So I think even like I love art for art's sake. That's excellent. But I think it's really like important in order to become a stronger artist to at least be interrogative with yourself about where the compulsions to do such things come from. And it doesn't have to have like sad, traumatic backstory. And I think one of the things that really like bristled me against kind of personal work was the kind of vague personal work where it's like, oh, well, the blue represents my dad. And it's like, well, how was I supposed to know that the blue represents your dad? Like it means nothing to me. So I think that was a part of it. And then just the act of kind of making yourself vulnerable is always, of course, very scary. But I think ultimately, like, I, at least on my personal journey, have managed to continue to like if you think about it, like Andy Warhol's pieces are intensely personal to a certain extent. Like there's the cover of like everyone recognizes the Campbell's Soup logo, but then also like Campbell's Soup was like what he ate as a kid every day when he was like bedridden. So of course that ethos is gonna like kind of stick in his mind, and those are the kind of things that were important to him, like celebrity and all of those concepts, like were deeply personal and came from somewhere. And I don't know, like you see all those like YouTube analyses of like trans reading of The Matrix and stuff. And like, maybe, I don't know, like The Matrix wasn't about that, but like when you know the director's experiences, you can start to kind of piece together stuff. And then also, of course, there's like kind of death of the artist, death of the author, like who does the work belong to once it's out? If you're painting these cicada people and someone's like, wow, I wonder what your fascination with the grotesque is, like that's their interpretation of the piece. Also, that's why artist statements are important.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Vanessa, you're up.
Yeah, that's what I had the question before, like what Meg put down for like the blue is like the color for like my father sort of thing. Like I feel like I forgot how to say this word, but I feel like I guess like if we like I feel like some people overthink things sometimes, and then they like, as Meg put it, like the whole idea of like whether or not you see this work this way or see it that way. What if the artist is just like, oh, I just want to do this because it feels like oh, I like this or like that or whatever. I feel like we sort of have to understand that other point of view, and I think maybe sometimes some like professors or teachers like to go into that realm of, this color, this thing means this way because the author seems to be that way. And I guess, like, I don't know how to say it. Like, I guess they need to better explain themselves about it.
Mm.
Yeah. That's the question I had, like, about it.
Okay. Good. This is a great discussion. I was going to stop at around 2:00, but why? You guys are doing great. I am going to stop it now though, because I got to get into Hegel, but this has been very enlightening. And for a number of reasons. It highlights some very important divisions in how, we think that art should be transmitted. And in thinking about how art should be transmitted, we betray what we think is important about art. And this is the last point I would make about Kant, is that I'm putting in the chat, for Kant, beauty is meaningless. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't have meaning or that it's insignificant. It is. It's just that beauty doesn't need to convey a message or anything beyond itself. Beauty just is. We're going to see something very different with Hegel. Listening to you guys, it occurs to me that Hegel has won out. He has won out in the art world. He has won out in art education. I don't think he would have anticipated you guys are all talking about your trauma, but for him, art is all about meaning and intellectual communication. And, where Kant would prioritize technique and genius, that is not the case for Hegel. I'm going to segue into Hegel now. I want to cover a bunch of things. I mean, I have to leave this discussion on Kant. I'm sorry. I have like 10 other questions I wanted to ask you guys, but I think I just have to put them on the back burner. I'm sure it'll all come up again. And these questions we discussed in the last hour and a half, these might be very good ideas for research papers going, final research papers. So I'm happy to explore it with you. Okay, but I got to move on. I got to wipe my hands of Kant and move into Hegel. Well, the first thing I got to tell you is this. In the philosophy of art, in the world of aesthetics, the battle lines are drawn. On one hand, you have Kant, on the other hand, Hegel. And you have contemporary philosophers who line up on either side. And it occurs to me that, and they don't really compromise. You're one or the other. I remember when I was in grad school, I went to grad school in Belgium, and I had a professor who was a Kantian. And he says, and he told me, if you agree with Hegel, then you are just the other side, and he was speaking disparagingly of Hegel and Hegel scholars. And he didn't, you're going to read Danto next, and he is the best known Hegel scholar when it comes to philosophy of art. And he really could not stand him. I don't really find myself so selfish. I see the merits of both. The division between Hegel and Kant does, to some degree, line up along the debate we were having right now about, what is essential to art? What is essential art education? What can be transmitted? What can't be? For Hegel, the question is, what should art do? Kant doesn't really talk about what art should do. He's interested in what constitutes beauty, but for him, it's self-explanatory. Like, art creates beauty, and that's really all there is to it. That is not enough. That question, that's not enough of an answer for Hegel. Okay, It looks like I pretty much only gonna have time to lecture, so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna dive us in, see how far I get with Hegel, and then we'll pick it up next week. First of all, the first thing you got to understand a couple things when it comes to Hegel. The first thing you need to understand is, in this period of philosophy, and you notice this in his writing style. Oh, by the way, Hegel, he lives 1770, 1830. He lived in Berlin. He was extremely famous at his time in life. He dies a little bit young. He is very influential to postmodern thinkers, in particular Marx. He was the single most important inspiration for Marx's philosophy. You won't see it in this work, but in his politics for sure. What I wanted to say is, one distinction we need to understand when it comes to Kant is, Hegel, is spirit versus matter. Reality is divided. You have the spiritual realm or the intellect, spirit or mind. He uses these terms interchangeably. And by the way, you may have noticed they were often capitalized. He is invoking God in a way without spelling it out. I don't want to get into too much detail with him, but I'll just leave it at that. And the material realm is the physical realm. And I need to explain to you a couple of distinctions about them. Spirit or mind is free. Matter is not. The physical world is not free. And what I mean by that is matter is determined. I see a stone, I push it. I am self-moving. Spirit is free in the sense that it is self-determining, right? And so you have to understand that major distinction for him, right? And art, interesting, is going to be significant because it kind of bridges the gap between these two realms. Let me dive into some of these sections, some of the points he makes early on here. As I think McShafe or Abby pointed out, like the early part of his discussion is about, he wants to offer a scientific study of art. And he opens up by discussing various objections to this, why art cannot be or should not be. But he's going to insist that it should be. First of all, I want to call your attention to page 9. This is section 12. He defines fine art. This is what fine art is. He says, fine art is not real art till it is in this sense free and only achieves its highest task when it has taken its place in the same sphere with religion and philosophy, and has become simply a mode of revealing to consciousness and bringing to utterance the divine nature, the deepest interests of humanity, and the most comprehensive truths of the mind. It is in works of art that nations have deposited their profoundest intuitions and ideas of their hearts. If you need to find that passage, because that's kind of a bomb. He drops a bomb right there. I'm just gonna point some things out again. According to Hegel, art is in the same company as religion and philosophy. They hang out together. Why? It has become a mode of revealing to consciousness and bringing to utterance the divine nature, right? Divine being God, right? Spirit speaks through art. It also gives expression to the deepest interests of humanity, the most comprehensive truths of the mind. Okay? So here we see a big difference with Kant. Art is an intellectual foray. It gives utterance to our deepest interests and desires. It is an expression of the divine spirit, the most comprehensive truths. And he goes on, it is in the works of art that nations have deposited the profoundest intuitions and ideas of their hearts. National, I want to be careful how I put this, but like Yeah, culture is expressed and articulated in works of art. So, you know, this is no small task. He fits art. Art has to do big things before you freak out and think, oh my God, I'm painting cicadas and I'm not painting, giving voice. Sorry, Shar, jabbing at you. I'm painting, I'm painting cicadas or I'm painting chairs and I'm not giving voice to the profoundest wishes of the nation or the profoundest interests of the nation. Kant is going to say you don't necessarily do that self-consciously. Shar might be a tool of spirit. She thinks she's doing something innocently, just painting cicadas, but this is God speaking through her. Oh, sorry, them. Sorry, Shar. This is God speaking through Shar, right? Or this is the nation of America. This is the post-Trump spirit is showing up in Shar's cicadas. All right, I know I'm probably making too much of Shar's cicadas, but I'm just giving you an idea here, right? For Hegel, art is always art is always conveying a message. It's always conveying meaning, with or without the will of the artist. In fact, it doesn't really matter. It's typically without, I think, according to Hegel. One of the notions of Hegel that a lot of people have not liked over the years is that we all are kind of tools of spirit to some degree. We're all kind of tools of history that are just spinning it out. But so there you have it, right? Okay. And he tells us on page 9, he says, art represents the highest ideas in sensuous form, okay, thereby bringing them nearer to the character of natural phenomenon. And he goes on here at the end of page 9, what is special here is about art is that, well, I'm reading a quote here in the next paragraph. The world into whose depths thought penetrates is a supra-sensuous world, which is thus to begin with erected as a beyond over against immediate consciousness and present sensation. The power which thus rescues itself from the here that consists in the actuality and finiteness of sense is the freedom of thought and cognition. But the mind is able to heal the schism. The mind heals the schism thanks to art. There's a schism between the physical and the spiritual, and art heals that schism. It generates out of itself the works of fine art as a first middle term of reconciliation between pure thought and what is external. Okay. We'll hit on this point later, but it's a Hegelian notion to say that art objects look physical and they inhabit the physical material realm, but they're not. They're an intellectual or spiritual message. They're certainly not functional. With that, he agrees with Kant. Here's another way he puts it. I love this on page 11. This is section 25. It is saying in so many terms what I just said a second ago. He says in the middle of that paragraph, in comparison with the show or semblance of the immediate sensuous existence or of a historical narrative, the artistic semblance has the advantage that in itself it points beyond itself and refers us away from itself to something spiritual was meant to bring before the mind's eye. Art points beyond itself. Most physical objects don't, right? My coffee mug here, it immediately it tells me its function, right? An art piece points beyond itself. It points beyond function, and it sends a message. It speaks to me about something else. It directs itself away from the material. I like that. I like the way he puts that. And it directs it to something spiritual. This is a nice rebuttal to Plato, right? Art is imitative. No, Hegel says it's not imitative. The artist is intentionally a bad imitator because he's trying to draw your the audience's mind away from the object itself to something else. Sorry, just checking the time. Okay, now this is where he gets controversial. One of the main themes of Hegel that is problematic for many is his idea of history and progress. He is a believer in progress. He's a believer that history progresses towards an end. This is where he was inspirational to Marx, right? Marx gets this idea that, we are leaving one period of history and we're entering the revolution of the proletariat. He gets that idea from Hegel. When it comes, and Hegel is a very strange guy in this respect. He believes in such a thing as progress in art. And we're going to deal with that next week. That's your reading for next week. He talks about progress through the ages of art. He's going to identify three. Typically, students are not happy with his characterization, but you'll notice that, again, this is a major point of difference. Kant says progress, that's not an idea proper to art. That's something we see in science. Hegel says, oh no. We see progress in art. And here's the kicker. There is a point beyond which art ends. There's a point beyond which art is no longer necessary. This is his most controversial claim when it comes to art. He lays this out on page 12. This is, and this is a point that Dante is going to take up. This is section, what is that, 17? He tells us, however all this may be, it certainly is the case that art no longer affords that satisfaction of spiritual wants, which earlier epochs and peoples have sought therein, and have found therein only a satisfaction which, at all events on the religious side, was most intimately and profoundly connected with art. The beautiful days of Greek art and the golden time of the later Middle Ages are gone by, blah, blah. I hope you noticed what he said in that first sentence. Art no longer affords that satisfaction of spiritual wants which earlier epochs and peoples have sought. There was a time when art did satisfy people spiritually. And now he thinks at his point in 1800 that there is a point beyond which that is no longer the case. Even if he is wrong about his own time period, some philosophers said, well, what if there is a certain point at which philosophy has exhausted all its means by which it can speak intellectually and has to hand that on? And who would it hand that task on to? Hang on, guys. I'm having a little bit of an emergency and my wife keeps calling me. So I'm just going to pause for 1 second. This doesn't usually. All right, guys, sorry about that. Any case, as I was saying, one of the most challenging things he says, the most controversial things he says, is that art, there's a certain point beyond which art may be dispensed. It may have fulfilled this task. And what would it pass on to? Well, according to Hegel, it is in the process. Art is in the process, it would hand itself off to philosophy. That's his claim. One way of putting it is that art is essentially philosophical in nature. Okay? What art does is that it conveys meaning about the most profound topics and issues in a person, in history, in nations. That's what it does. But because it is something that helps us bridge the gap with matter, at a certain point, humanity can hand that task on to pure philosophy itself. Okay. Let me pause there for a second. See if any of these questions. I'll go over this again next week at the beginning. Let me move on a little bit. Why is a science of art necessary? This is, his justification for the first chapter, because it is an experience for, it's an opportunity of self-understanding, of humanity to understand itself. When we see an art form, what we're really seeing is, and I believe, let me see if this is how he puts it. He uses the word, yes, this is a beautiful passage. This is middle of page 15, halfway down. He says, thus the work of art in which thought alienates itself belongs like thought itself to the realm of comprehending thought. I love that. The work of art in which thought alienates itself. In art, thought alienates itself. Alienates means very literally like it is it puts itself before itself, like so you can see it, right? To alien, when in art, you are expressing something and then suddenly you see it from a different vantage point, right? I think we had this conversation in class earlier. I can't remember what topic it was, but how does your awareness or understanding of something change when you put it in print or you put it in visual form in front of you, right? Don't you understand it differently? Don't you understand yourself differently, right? So in art, thought alienates itself. It becomes something out there in the physical world that we can now see about ourselves. This is the last time I will use Shar for my services. But Shar is making cicadas and thinking, my God, there was something imminent in me. Shar is learning something about themselves, right? Something grotesque. I think you're okay, Shar. I wouldn't worry about it. But you know what I mean? But the point is, like, and I think that's right to some degree. Like, I don't do visual art, but I write. And I sometimes I don't always know what I think until I write it. And then I'm like, oh my God, that's what I think. It's not enough to have it in your mind. It is when it is objectified, then suddenly you know what you think. And actually it can evolve too, It's a very important process. So I realized I may have a plug for your art instructors who want you to get to the bottom of your motivations. I think in getting you to write about them, they're hoping that you can expand, and expand that thought process. In any case. Let me get into this next topic and I'll take about 10 minutes. Chapter 3 was the conception of artistic beauty. And he lays out 3 things. This is on page 30 at the top. He says at the top, we suppose the work of art to be no natural product, right? I skipped over this point. Hopefully you noticed at the beginning. He does not ascribe art to nature, beauty to nature. Beauty is a property of art. It's a human construct, okay? Essentially because one thing I hope you're noticing is that for him, beauty is bound up with an intellectual proposition. There's some kind of intellectual proposition engaged in art, and good art, beautiful art does that. But nature in and of itself does not offer us intellectual propositions, according to him. About the conception of art, again, this top of page 30. So we suppose the work of art to be no natural product. We suppose it to be essentially made for humans. and addressed to man's sense. It's addressed to us. It addresses us. Good art addresses us, says something, or just art says something. And to contain an end. And by end here, that means a goal or a purpose or an aim, okay? Just a couple points about why, you know, he says that, you know, what is art doing? Art is an elevation of nature. God looks favorably on it because this is the human creation, right? Nature is God's creation, and humans who are made in God's image, this is our creation. But he also says, this is on page 34, art is superior to nature because it confers a kind of permanence on things. Natural objects come and go, the trees, the flowers, the fruit, but art objects endure, not forever, but they endure. So art confers permanence on physical objects. Let's see here. And I think I'm going to hit on this one last point before, well, I have two more points I want to make. This is a beautiful question, page 35. He says, what is our need in producing works of art? What is our need in producing? I love that he asks this question, you know. Plato doesn't. Kant doesn't really. But Hegel does. Art is a human impulse. It's a human phenomenon. Clearly, humanity expresses some need in expressing art. What is it? Well, he tells us on page 35 and 36, he says, we need to strip the external material world of its foreignness. That's around page 36. Art is our attempt to dress up the world in a way. You know, humans come into this physical world, this natural world, and it is mysterious and is dangerous and is foreboding. And what do we do with art? We fill that natural world with images that make it less foreboding. You could say it's a way of conquering nature, but I don't mean that conquering, I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. Like, it's a way of making it familiar and less foreign and less foreboding. It's a way of claiming the material world and transforming it into something that looks human, that speaks back to us. Trees don't reflect the human, but our artwork reflects the human. He says that art, this is a funny way of putting it, but art involves a reduplication of man. It's a funny thing. Like, in art, we're duplicating ourselves. Like, I make a piece and I put it out there, and that's a reflection of me in this otherwise alien world. There is a critique of Kant on taste. I'm going to leave that for next week. But there was one other point that I wanted to hit on, and I believe this is something that I asked about in your reading responses. He says that art work art is the semblance of the sensuous. And this is in page 43. I like this too. I know I told you last week or last class, I don't like Hegel. Every time I teach him, though, I like his phrasing. He's an evocative. He has evocative phrases. And that's why French philosophers love him for this reason. But, art is the semblance of the sensuous. That's a very nice phrase. And what that means is, artworks, they look like sensible, like physical objects, but they're not. They look like physical objects in the material world, but they're not exactly. They're kind of hollow. They're kind of empty. They're just carriers for some other intellectual or spiritual purpose or philosophical purpose. They're conveying something else, right? They point beyond themselves. Good. All right. I think that is probably a logical stopping point for today. What I'm going to do when we reconvene on Monday is I'm going to unpack this with your help and see if I can get you guys to answer some questions. And then we'll dive into the next section, which you're going to read for Monday, which is, the different ages of art, progress in art, and also this is going to be uncomfortable, but ranking. Hegel is a big into ranking. He will rank the different types of art. Some of your media will not be represented there. He didn't know animation, for example. Joey, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to check and see if I could stay behind to talk about the essay.
No problem. Anybody can. All right. So great discussion today, guys. I hope you used up some energy and now you can relax for the weekend. And I'll see you Monday. Okay. You all know what to do. And I will stick around because I know some of you want to talk to me.
Bye.
All right. Peace, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. Nin and Junyan, I'm going to put you guys in the waiting room. Okay.
Okay.
That way, each of you can have a little bit of privacy, and I'll come get you when it's your time. All right, Joey, what's up?
Hey, I'm happy with my grade. I'm not like trying to change that or anything. I just want to know what like what's more specifically like you think that I need to like delve a little bit deeper into, as well as like, can you